3 months had passed since the Korvathi contract began and everything had changed. The cargo delivery had been completed without a single complication. Saren had monitored every detail of the shipment from the moment the biological samples were loaded until they reached the research station. She had anticipated problems before they arose and solved complications before anyone else knew they existed. The temperature controls had functioned perfectly. The timeline had been met with 2 days to spare, and at the end of it all, Asharavel had done something that no Korvathi diplomat had ever done before. She had issued a public commendation for Horizon Freight. The statement was brief and formal in the Korvathi way, but its impact rippled across the entire station. Species who had never heard of Horizon Freight suddenly wanted to know more about the small human company that had earned Korvathi approval. New clients began approaching them within days. Companies that had previously dismissed them as too small or too inexperienced were now requesting meetings. Even species who had never worked with human businesses before expressed interest in discussing potential contracts. Junyuk stood in the middle of the expanded office and shook his head in amazement. They had moved to a larger space 2 weeks ago. The old office had simply become too cramped to handle the increased volume of work. "I never thought I would see this," he said. "See what?" Siren asked. "Aliens lining up to work with a human company." Siren smiled but did not reply. She was reviewing the latest contract proposals on her datapad, and the numbers still seemed unreal. Horizon Freight had more work than they could handle. They had hired 3 new employees in the past month, and they would need to hire more soon. "I want to discuss something with you," Junyuk said. Saren looked up. His expression was serious, but there was warmth underneath it. "I want to offer you a partnership in the company," he said. Saren blinked. "What?" "You have earned it," Junyuk said. "Everything we have accomplished in the past 3 months is because of your work." "That is not true," Saren said. "You built this company over 23 years. I built a small, struggling operation that barely survived from month to month." Junyuk said. "You turned it into something that actually matters." He pulled a document from his desk and handed it to her. It was a partnership agreement. Her name was already printed on it. "You do not have to decide now," he said. "Take your time and think about it." Saren looked at the document in her hand. 6 months ago, she had been a desperate refugee with 19 days until her family was torn apart. Now, she was being offered a partnership in a successful company. The journey from there to here seemed impossible. "Can I ask you something?" she said. Junyuk nodded. "The photograph on your desk," she said. "Who are they?" Junyuk was silent for a long moment. His eyes moved to the worn image of the woman and child. "My wife and daughter," he said quietly. "They were on a transport ship that was attacked by raiders 15 years ago. I am sorry. Their names were Minhee and Soi." He continued. "Soi would have been 22 this year." Saren did not know what to say. "I built this company because I needed something to build," Junyuk said. "After I lost them, I did not know what else to do with myself." He looked at Saren. "When you walked into my office 3 months ago, I saw someone fighting for her daughter the way I wished I could have fought for mine." "Junyuk, I could not save my family," he said, "but I can help you save yours." Saren felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She did not try to stop them. "Thank you," she whispered. "You saved this company," Junyuk said. "Thank yourself." The door opened and Myray ran in. She was breathless with excitement. "Mama," she said, "the school council selected me." "Selected you for what?" "The station cultural exchange," Myray said. "I am going to represent the human quarter." Saren pulled her daughter into a hug. "That is wonderful. Keth helped me practice my presentation." Myray continued. "He says human children are very good at making friends across species." Saren smiled. Her daughter had become something of a celebrity in the diplomatic section after her conversation with Ashara's young assistant, the Korvathi. had been so impressed by Murray's directness and curiosity that they had invited her to visit their race delegation several times. She was probably the only human child in the galaxy who had been inside. Kovathi diplomatic quarters. The office door opened again, and Unji walked in, followed by Thesik Morn. The Vethany merchant had changed in the months since their first meeting. He no longer looked through Siren as if she were invisible. I wish to discuss a new contract, Thesik said. A significant shipment that requires careful coordination. I can review the specifications this afternoon, Siren said. I want you specifically to handle it, Thesik said. The words hung in the air, coming from a Vethani. This was almost unprecedented. They never requested specific individuals. They simply expected competence and punished failure. You have proven yourself reliable, Thesik continued. More reliable than any coordinator I have worked with, regardless of species. It was the closest thing to a compliment he had ever given her. Siren nodded. I will make sure the shipment meets your requirements. Thesik turned and left without another word. Unji watched him go and shook her head. I never thought I would see a Vethany ask nicely for anything. He did not ask nicely, Siren said. He just asked. For him, that is the same thing. Later that evening, Ishara Vel arrived at the office. The Kovathi diplomat had requested a meeting, but she had not explained why. Siren met her in the small conference room. I wanted to speak with you before we departed the station, Ishara said. You are leaving? Our mission here is complete, Ishara said. We return to Kovathi space tomorrow. I am glad we were able to work together. Ishara studied her with those dark, unreadable eyes. The Kovathi have been observing human behavior across the galaxy, she said. Your species confuses us. In what way? You are too emotional, Ishara said. Too attached to individuals rather than systems. I have heard that before. You sacrifice for people you barely know. Ishara continued. You form bonds with strangers, and you fight for those bonds even when the cost is high. That is simply what humans do. Siren said. Yes, Ishara said. We have noticed. She paused. At first we thought this was a weakness, she said. Now we are not certain. What changed your mind? You did, Ishara said. You came to me with nothing but honesty and a willingness to understand. I was just doing my job. No, Ishara said. You were being human. She stood to leave. The Kovathi do not form attachments easily, she said. But I believe we will work with Horizon Freight again. I would like that. Ishara paused at the door. Your daughter is remarkable, she said. She will do great things. I hope so. I do not hope, Ishara said. I have seen it. She walked out of the conference room. Siren sat alone for a moment and let the silence settle around her. She thought about everything that had happened since she arrived on this station. The rejections and the desperation and the fear. The chance that Jung-Yuk had given her. The family she had found in this small company. She picked up the partnership agreement from where she had left it. On the table, her name was printed there, waiting for her signature. 6 months ago, she had been fighting to survive. Now she was being asked to help build something that would last. She walked back to the main office. Jun-Yuk and Yoonji and Mireille were gathered around a datapad laughing at something. They looked up when she entered. I have made my decision, Siren said. She held up the partnership agreement. Where do I sign? Jun-Yuk smiled. It was the first time she had seen him truly smile. Welcome to the family, he said. Mireille ran to her mother and hugged her tight. Does this mean we get to stay forever? Yes, Siren said. We get to stay. She looked out the window at the ships moving through the void beyond the station. Cargo vessels and transports and explorers, carrying species from 100 different worlds. Humanity was still small out here. Still underestimated. Still fighting for every opportunity. But they looked after each other. And that was enough? It had always been enough. Siren spent 3 days searching through every cargo listing and trade bulletin on the station. She cross-referenced shipping routes with company capabilities and analyzed profit margins until her eyes burned. On the fourth day, she found something that made her stop. A Corvathi delegation was seeking a shipper for a sensitive cargo transfer. The Corvathi were one of the oldest species in the known galaxy, and they were famous for two things: their advanced technology and their complete distrust of outsiders. They rarely engaged in commerce with other species, and when they did, the negotiations were legendary for their difficulty. No alien company on the station had accepted their contract. The payment methods were considered unreliable, and the cargo requirements were so specific that most shippers refused to even consider the job. Siren stared at the listing for a long time. This was exactly the kind of contract that Horizon Freight specialized in: dangerous and difficult, and ignored by the major corporations. She brought the listing to Junyuk. "The Corvathi?" he said. "Siren, they have rejected every offer. I know. Their negotiators are impossible to work with." He continued. "They find fault with everything, and they trust no one. I know. If we approach them and fail, it could damage our reputation even further," he said. "The other clients will think we are desperate." "We are desperate," Siren said quietly. Junyuk was silent. "Let me try," Siren said. "If I fail, then we are no worse off than we are now. And if you succeed, then we have the contract we need." Junyuk studied her face for a long moment. "You really believe you can do this?" he said. "I believe I have to try." He nodded slowly. "Then try." The Corvathi delegation was housed in a restricted section of the station, reserved for diplomatic visitors. Siren had to pass through 3 security checkpoints before she reached their quarters. The guards at each checkpoint looked at her human face with barely concealed surprise. Humans did not visit the diplomatic section. The Corvathi receiving room was stark and undecorated. The walls were bare metal, and the furniture was functional without any attempt at comfort. A single figure sat behind a low table and watched Siren enter. Isharavel was tall even by Corvathi standards. Her skin was the pale gray that marked her as a member of the diplomatic caste, and her eyes were large and dark and utterly unreadable. "You are the human representative from Horizon Freight," Ishara said. Her voice was flat and carried no emotion. "I'm Yoon Siren," Siren said. "I am the logistics coordinator for Horizon Freight. You are not the owner." "No." Ishara's expression did not change. "Every other company has sent their highest-ranking representative to negotiate with us," she said. "They believe that authority would impress us." "I am not here to impress you," Siren said. "I am here to understand what you need." Something flickered in Ishara's dark eyes. It might have been surprise. "Sit," she said. Siren sat on the floor cushion across from Ishara. The Corvathi did not use chairs. "We have rejected 14 offers from shipping companies," Ishara said. "Do you know why?" "No, because every negotiator who came to us talked only about their own capabilities," Ishara said. "They told us what their ships could do and what their crews had accomplished and what their companies had achieved. They did not ask what you actually needed." Siren said. Ishara's eyes narrowed slightly. "No," she said. "They did not." "Then tell me," Siren said. "What do you need?" The question hung in the air between them. Ishara was silent for a long moment. "Our cargo is biological samples from our homeworld," she said finally. "They must be maintained at precise temperature and humidity levels throughout transport. What are the tolerances?" Ishara told her. The requirements were extraordinarily specific. A variation of even 1% in either direction would destroy the samples. "What is your timeline?" Siren asked. "The samples must reach the research station within 40 standard days." "And your concerns about previous offers?" Ishara's expression shifted. It was subtle, but Siren caught it. No one had ever asked her that question. "The other companies assured us they could meet our requirements," Ishara said. "But when we asked for details about their environmental control systems, they became defensive. They did not want to admit their limitations, Siren said. Yes. What else? Their payment terms were inflexible, Ishara continued. Kolvathi payment systems operate differently than standard galactic credits, and none of the other companies were willing to accommodate our methods. Siren nodded slowly. She was beginning to understand the problem. The other companies had approached this negotiation as a contest. They had tried to prove their worth through confidence and credentials, but the Kolvathi did not care about confidence. They cared about competence. I need to review our environmental systems before I can make any promises about temperature control, Siren said, and I will need more information about your payment methods before I can propose contract terms. Ishara stared at her. You are not going to assure me that your company can handle anything. No, Siren said. I'm going to find out if we can actually do what you need, and then I am going to tell you the truth. The silence stretched between them. You are unlike the other negotiators. Ishara said at last. I am not really a negotiator, Siren admitted. I am a logistics coordinator. Perhaps that is why. Siren rose to leave and paused at the door. I will return tomorrow with a detailed proposal, she said. If our capabilities do not meet your requirements, I will tell you honestly. And if they do, then we will discuss terms. She walked out of the receiving room and found Myre waiting in the corridor outside. Her daughter had insisted on coming along, and Siren had not had the heart to refuse. A young Kolvathi stood nearby watching Myre with obvious curiosity. Mama, Myre said. This is Keth. She pointed at the young Kolvathi. He is Ishara's assistant, and he has never met a human child before. Keth made a small gesture that might have been a greeting. Your offspring is remarkably direct, he said to Siren. She asked me 17 questions in the time you were meeting with the diplomat. Siren felt a flash of concern. I apologize if she disturbed you. She did not disturb me, Keth said. She interested me. He looked at Myre with something that almost resembled warmth. Human children are curious creatures, he said. I had not expected that. Siren glanced back at the receiving room door. Through the small window, she could see Ishara watching them. The diplomat's expression was thoughtful. The next morning, Siren received a message from the Kolvathi. Delegation Ishara had reviewed her proposal and found it acceptable, but she had one additional requirement. She wanted Siren to personally oversee the entire operation. Siren read the message 3 times to make sure she understood it correctly. The Kolvathi trusted her. After one meeting and one honest conversation, they trusted her more than they had trusted any of the other companies. She walked into Junyuk's office and placed her datapad on his desk. We have the contract, she said. Junyuk looked at the message and his eyes widened. How did you do this? I asked questions, Siren said, and listened to the answers. Junyuk was quiet for a long moment. You know, this is just the beginning, he said finally. The hard part is actually completing the delivery. I know. The Kolvathi will be watching every step of the process. I know. And if we fail, we will not fail, Siren said. The certainty in her voice surprised even her, but looking at Junyuk's face, she realized that she meant it. She would not let this company fail. She would not let the people who had given her a chance down. Not now, not ever. 3 weeks had passed since Siren started working at Horizon Freight, and she had already transformed the way the company operated. The filing systems that had once been scattered across multiple databases were now consolidated into a single, organized network. The communication protocols that had caused delays and missed messages were streamlined and efficient. The scheduling conflicts that had cost the company credits and clients were identified and resolved. Junyuk watched her work with quiet approval, but he rarely offered praise. He was not the type of man who used words when actions would suffice. Siren learned to read his satisfaction in the small nod he gave when she completed a task well, or the way he trusted her with Increasingly important responsibilities, Mei Yunji had been skeptical at first. The young pilot had worked alone with Junhyuk for 3 years, and she was protective of their small operation. But her attitude changed after Siren covered for a critical scheduling error without telling Junhyuk. Yunji had double-booked 2 cargo runs, and the mistake would have cost them a major client. Siren had noticed the conflict and quietly rearranged the schedule so that both deliveries could be completed on time. She never mentioned it to Junhyuk. Yunji found out later, and she cornered Siren in the break room. "Why did you not tell him?" Yunji demanded. "Tell him what?" "About my mistake." Siren shrugged. The problem was solved, and the client was satisfied. She said, "There was no reason to make things difficult for you." Yunji stared at her for a long moment. "You are strange," she said finally. "I have been told that before." After that day, Yunji treated Siren like family. Mireille had started spending time at the Horizon Freight office after her school sessions ended. Junhyuk had offered to let her stay in the small break room and do her homework while Siren worked. At first, Mireille had been shy around the adults, but within a week she was wandering through the office and asking questions about everything she saw. She was fascinated by the navigation charts and the cargo manifests and the communication equipment. She asked Junhyuk to explain how the ship tracking systems worked, and he spent an hour teaching her the basics. She asked Unji about her cargo runs, and the pilot told her stories about strange planets and stranger aliens. The girl absorbed information like a sponge. Her presence brightened the small office in ways that Siren had not expected. Even Junhyuk seemed lighter when Mireille was around. The serious lines of his face would soften when she asked him questions or showed him something she had learned. Siren sometimes caught him watching Mireille with an expression she could not quite identify. It looked almost like grief. The first real test of Siren's abilities came when Nesik Morn arrived at the office. He was a Vethany merchant with scales the color of dried blood and eyes that never blinked. The Vethany were known throughout the galaxy for their brutal business practices and their complete lack of sentiment. Nesik had a cargo contract with Horizon Freight, and he had come to discuss the terms for an upcoming shipment. He walked into the office, and his gaze swept past Siren as if she were furniture. "I wish to speak with Park Junhyuk," he said. "Junhyuk is reviewing the cargo specifications." Siren replied, "I handle all coordination matters for Horizon Freight." Nesik's tail flicked in irritation. "I do not negotiate with subordinates," he said. "Bring me someone with actual authority." Siren felt her face flush, but she kept her voice calm. "I have full authority to discuss contract terms," she said. "If you have concerns about the shipment, I am the person who can address them." Nesik turned and walked toward Junhyuk's desk. Junhyuk looked up from his datapad, and his expression did not change. "Nesik," he said, "I see you have met Siren. I do not conduct business with humans who are not in charge." Nesik said, "I want to speak with you. Siren handles all coordination for this company." Junhyuk said calmly, "If you want to discuss your contract, you speak with her. This is unacceptable. Then find another shipper." Junhyuk said the words hung in the air between them. Nesik's tail went rigid with surprise. No one spoke to Vethany merchants that way. They were among the wealthiest traders on the station, and their business was valuable to any shipping company. Junhyuk returned his attention to his datapad as if the conversation was over. Nesik stood in silence for a long moment. His eyes moved from Junhyuk to Siren and back again. "Very well," he said at last. "I will discuss the contract with your coordinator." Over the following days, Siren managed Nesik's contract with meticulous precision. She anticipated problems before they arose, and she solved complications before Nesik even knew they existed. She communicated with him in clear professional terms, and she never let his dismissive attitude affect her work. By the end of the contract, Nesik had stopped looking through her as if she were invisible. He still did not treat her with respect, but he acknowledged her competence. It was more than any alien had ever given her. Mireille was thriving too. She had made friends among the children in the human quarter, and she spent her free time teaching them the alien phrases. She had learned her laughter echoed through the corridors, and Siren sometimes stopped just to listen to the sound. But not everything was going well. One evening, Jun-Yuk called Siren into his office after Mireille had fallen asleep in the break room. "We have a problem," he said. Siren sat down across from him. "What kind of problem?" "Meridian Shipping has undercut our contract with the Belrathi Trade Consortium," Jun-Yuk said. "They offered rates we cannot match, and the consortium has cancelled their agreement with us. The Belrathi contract was 20% of our revenue." Siren said, "Yes. Can we find replacement clients?" Jun-Yuk shook his head slowly. "Not quickly enough," he said. "Without that revenue, we cannot cover our operating costs for more than 2 weeks." The words hit Siren like a physical blow, too. Weeks. She had escaped the 19-day countdown only to face another deadline. "There must be something we can do," she said. "There is always something," Jun-Yuk agreed. "But I do not know what it is yet." He looked tired in a way she had not seen before. The weight of 23 years running this company seemed to press down on his shoulders. "We need a significant new contract within 2 weeks," he said. "Something big enough to replace what we have lost." "I will find it," Siren said. Jun-Yuk looked at her. "This is not your responsibility," he said. "I hired you to coordinate shipments, not to save the company. You gave me a chance when no one else would." Siren said, "I am not going to let this company fail without a fight." Something shifted in Jun-Yuk's expression. The exhaustion was still there, but underneath it, Siren saw something that looked like hope. "Then we fight together," he said. Siren nodded and stood up. She had 2 weeks to find a miracle. She had beaten longer odds before. She walked back to the break room where Mireille was sleeping peacefully on the small couch. Her daughter's face was relaxed, and trusting Siren leaned down and kissed her forehead. "I will keep you safe," she whispered. "I promise." She straightened up and looked at the navigation charts on the wall. Somewhere in this station, there was a client who needed what Horizon Freight could offer. She just had to find them. The human quarter was nothing like Siren had expected. She had imagined something cramped and desperate, like the lower decks where she lived. Instead, she found clean corridors with proper lighting and air that filled her lungs without effort. The walls were decorated with artwork and photographs and signs, written in Korean and English, and half a dozen other human languages. People nodded at her as she passed. Actual humans who looked at her face and smiled instead of clicking their mandibles or flicking their tails in dismissal. A child ran past her laughing, and for a moment, Siren forgot why she was here. She had not seen a human child other than Mireille in 8 months. The Horizon Freight office was located at the end of a quiet corridor. The door was plain metal with a small sign that displayed the company name in simple letters. Siren stood outside for a long moment and tried to calm her racing heart. She had been rejected 47 times. She knew how this would go. She would walk in and present her credentials, and the owner would find some reason to say no. Maybe he would tell her that he already had enough staff. Maybe he would say that her experience was not quite right for what he needed. Maybe he would just look at her with pity and explain that his small company could not afford another employee. She had heard every excuse. She knew them all by heart. But she had 19 days and no other options, so she pressed her palm against the door scanner and stepped inside. The office was small but organized. Navigation charts covered one wall and cargo. Manifests were stacked in neat piles on every available surface. The smell of coffee hung in the air, and Siren realized with a start that she had not smelled real coffee in months. A man sat behind a cluttered desk, and he looked up when she entered. He was perhaps 50 years old, with gray streaking his black hair and deep lines around his eyes. His face was weathered in the way that came from years of space travel and hard decisions. You must be the one who applied for the coordinator position," he said. His voice was calm and unhurried. "Yes," Siren said. "I am Yoon Siren. Park Junyuk," he said. "Sit down." He gestured to a chair across from his desk, and Siren sat. She placed her datapad on the desk between them and waited for him to dismiss her. Instead, he picked up the datapad and began reading through her credentials. He did not skim them the way the alien hiring managers had. He actually read them. "Logistics coordinator for the colony transport Eternal Hope," he said. 300 colonists and 18 months of deep space travel. "Yes, I heard about the Eternal Hope," he said. "Engine failure 6 months out from the destination. The primary and secondary systems both failed," Siren said. "We had to shut down non-essential sections and consolidate everyone into the central habitation ring. How many did you lose?" The question surprised her. No one had ever asked her that before. 12, she said quietly. 12 people died before. "We were rescued." Junyuk nodded slowly. 288 people survived an 18-month crisis because someone kept them organized and fed and calm. He said, "That was you. I was part of the coordination team." "You were the coordination team," he said. "I checked the rescue reports before you arrived." Siren stared at him. He had actually researched her background. No one had ever bothered to do that. "Why are you here?" he asked. "I need work," Siren said. "No alien company will hire me, and I have a daughter, and in 19 days we will be sent to the refugee processing center." She had not meant to be so blunt. She had meant to present herself as a confident professional who would be an asset to any company. But she was tired. She was so tired of pretending. Junyuk leaned back in his chair and studied her face. "How old is your daughter?" 7. "What is her name?" "Myra." Something flickered across his face when she said the name, but it was gone before she could identify it. "My company survives by taking contracts that the big alien shipping corporations consider beneath them," he said. "Dangerous routes with unstable clients and minimal profit margins." "I understand. I have one other employee," he continued. "Bae-Yoonji handles most of the cargo runs while I manage the business side. That leaves no one to coordinate shipments when you are both off station," Siren said. Junyuk smiled for the first time. "You see the problem. I can solve that problem," Siren said. "I can manage scheduling and client communications and cargo tracking. The pay is not good." Junyuk warned her. "I cannot offer you what the alien corporations would pay. The alien corporations will not hire me at any wage." "No," he agreed. "They will not." He was quiet for a moment, and Siren held her breath. "The job is yours if you want it," he said. Siren blinked. "What?" "You start tomorrow," Junyuk said. "I will send you the contract details this evening." "Why?" The word escaped before she could stop it. Junyuk raised an eyebrow. "Why what? Why would you take a chance on a stranger?" Siren asked. "You do not know me, and you have no reason to trust me." Junyuk was quiet for a long moment. He looked at a framed photograph on his desk, and his expression softened into something that might have been grief. 23 years ago, I was stranded on this station with nothing but the clothes I was wearing, he said. I had no credits and no connections and no reason to believe anyone would help me. What happened? A human woman who ran a small repair shop gave me a job, he said. She did not know me and she had no reason to trust me, but she looked at another human who was struggling and she decided to help. He looked back at Siren. Humans look after each other out here, he said. No one else will. Siren felt tears prick at the corners of her eyes, but she forced them back. She would not cry, not here. Not now. Thank you, she said. Do not thank me yet, Junyuk replied. The work is hard and the hours are long. And the clients can be difficult. I have survived difficult before. I know you have, he said. That is why I am hiring you. Siren stood and reached across the desk to shake his hand. His grip was firm and warm. "I will not let you down," she said. "I know you will not." She turned to leave and paused at the door. The photograph on his desk showed a woman and a young child. Both were clearly human, and the image was old and worn at the edges. She wanted to ask about them, but something in Jun-Yuk's expression told her that the question would not be welcome. Not yet. Perhaps. Not ever. Tomorrow at 8. Jun-Yuk said. "Do not be late." "I will not be." Siren walked out of the office and into the corridor. She stood there for a moment and let the reality of what had just happened sink in. She had a job after 47 rejections and 8 months of struggling and 19 days of desperation. She finally had a job. She wanted to run through the corridors, shouting with joy. Instead, she walked calmly back toward the lift that would take her to the lower decks. She had to tell Mireille. She had to tell her daughter that they were going to be okay. For the first time since they had arrived on this station, Siren allowed herself to believe that might actually be true. Yoon Siren stood outside the glass doors of Keth Varnes Trading Company and stared at the rejection letter glowing on her datapad. The words were polite, but they carried the same meaning as every other rejection she had received in the past. 3 months. We regret to inform you that your application does not meet our species compatibility requirements. She had heard these words 47 times now. 47 companies had looked at her credentials and her experience and her desperate willingness to work any shift at any wage, and they had all said no. The Drellith hiring manager had not even pretended to consider her application. He had taken one look at her human face, and his mandibles had clicked together in that dismissive pattern she had learned to recognize. Humans are too fragile, he had said without looking up from his terminal. Your species requires excessive atmospheric accommodation, and your lifespans are too short to justify training investments. Siren had wanted to argue. She had wanted to tell him that she had managed logistics for 300 colonists on a failing ship for 18 months. She had wanted to explain that she had kept people alive when every system was breaking down around them. But she had learned that arguing only made things worse. Aliens did not change their minds about humans. They had already decided what humans were worth, and nothing she said would alter that calculation. She walked away from the trading company and made her way through the crowded corridors of Nexus. Station Prime. The station was enormous, and it housed thousands of businesses from dozens of species. Tall Vethany merchants haggled with squat Kovathi traders, while insectoid Drellith workers scurried past carrying cargo containers twice their size. Humans were rare here. Siren could walk for an hour without seeing another member of her species. She had arrived on this station 8 months ago with her daughter, Mireille, after their colony transport had suffered a catastrophic engine failure. A passing cargo vessel had rescued the survivors, but the rescue had not been free. The captain had demanded payment, and when the colonists could not pay, he had dropped them at the nearest station and left them to find their own way. Most of the other survivors had managed to secure passage back to human space within the first few months. They had family who could send credits or skills that were valuable enough to earn quick employment. Siren had neither. Her parents were dead, and her ex-husband had vanished years before Mireille was born. Her skills were in logistics and coordination, and every alien company on the station considered those positions too important to trust to a human. She reached the lift that would take her down to the lower decks, and she pressed her palm against the scanner. The doors opened, and she stepped inside. The lift descended through the station's levels, and with each floor, the air grew slightly thinner and the lights grew slightly dimmer. The lower decks were where the station housed those who could not afford better. The oxygen ratios here were kept at the minimum level that humans could tolerate. It saved the station money on atmospheric processing. Siren had grown used to the constant, slight breathlessness that came with living down here. She had grown used to a lot of things. The doors to her quarters slid open, and Myra looked up from the small table where she was doing her schoolwork. Her daughter was 7 years old, and she had her father's dark eyes and her mother's stubborn chin. "Did you get the job?" Myra asked. Siren forced herself to smile. "Not this time," she said. "But there are other companies. Why do the aliens never want to talk to you?" Siren sat down across from her daughter and reached out to brush a strand of hair from Myra's face. "They just need more time to understand us," she said. "Humans are new out here, and the other species do not know us very well yet." It was a lie, but it was a gentle one. The truth was that the aliens knew exactly what they thought of humans. They thought humans were weak and short-lived, and too emotional to be trusted with real work. Myra nodded and returned to her schoolwork, and Siren pulled up her credit balance on the datapad. The number that appeared made her stomach clench. She had 19 days of rent remaining. After that, the station's automated systems would flag her quarters for repossession, and security would relocate her and Myra to the refugee processing center. She had heard stories about that place. Families were separated there. Children were placed in communal care facilities, while their parents were assigned to labor pools. Some families never found each other again. Siren would not let that happen to Myra. She would scrub floors or haul cargo, or do anything else that kept them together. She opened the job listings on her datapad and began scrolling through them. Most of the postings were from companies that had already rejected her. A few new listings had appeared, but they all specified species requirements that excluded humans. She was about to close the listings when one entry caught her attention. It was a small posting with minimal information. Horizon Freight seeks experienced logistics coordinator. The listing read, "Flexible species requirements." The company address was in a sector Siren had never visited. She checked the location and her eyebrows rose. It was in the Human Quarter. She had heard of this place, but she had never been there. The Human Quarter was a small section of the station where the few permanent human residents had established something resembling a community. Most stranded humans could not afford to live there. The rents were higher than the lower decks, but the atmosphere was calibrated for human comfort, and the residents looked after each other. Siren looked at the posting again. The owner's name was listed as Park Jun-yuk, a human name. She had applied to so many alien companies that she had forgotten humans could own businesses on this station. For a moment, she felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. It was a dangerous feeling. Hope had a way of making the inevitable disappointment hurt even more. But she could not afford to ignore any opportunity. She had 19 days. She saved the listing and looked over at Myra. Her daughter had finished her schoolwork and was now reading something on her own small datapad. The girl had learned 3 alien languages in the 8 months they had been on the station. Children adapted faster than adults. They did not carry the same weight of expectations and failures. "Myra," Siren said, "I found another job listing. Will they say yes this time?" "I do not know," Siren admitted, "but this one is different." "How?" "The owner is human." Marie's eyes widened. "There are other humans here?" "There are a few," Siren said. "I have just never met them." She looked back at the posting on her datapad. The Human Quarter was on the far side of the station, and it would take her 2 hours to get there. She would have to leave early tomorrow morning to make the trip. She would have to find someone to watch Myra while she was gone. She would have to hope that this Park Jun-yuk was different from everyone else who had looked at her and seen only her species. Siren closed her eyes and let out a slow breath. 19 days. One more chance. She had survived worse odds before. She had kept 300 people alive on a dying ship with nothing but her wits and her determination. She could do this. She had to do this for Myra. She opened her eyes and looked at the address. One more time. Tomorrow she would find out if humans really looked after each other out here. Tomorrow she would find out if hope was worth the risk.